Pankaj Sharma is now joining us. Mr. Sharma, after DVs, now it is Ajanta Pharma. How big a risk is this to the sector, and do you think markets is ignoring that risk?
I think first part is that one is that when you say that it's a significant risk for companies and the sector, that's definitely correct. But has the market been ignoring this? It's very, very difficult to look at individual companies and then decide that which companies would get a next import alert and something of this sort would happen with them. So it is an individual event, and specifically for the companies, whenever it happens, you would see these kind of reactions. But yes, if you see that even the large caps and even the sectors in general, last 18-24 months have not been a situation where these things were very, very rare. These things are happening with more frequency, with more consistency, and also with a lot of companies. So it's not a phenomenon which is limited to one or two companies. It's a sector thing which is happening with almost everyone, and that's something which is the most worrying part. But can you really forecast where you are going to get a hit next? It's very, very difficult to do so. And these kind of cases like Divi or Ajanta, they can happen with more regularity, and they can happen with anyone. So difficult to forecast when somebody will get hit and whether the market is ignoring. Not really, but these are the events which can happen with anyone.
Right. Just wanted to ask that, this is an import alert, so one should not mix it with Form 483. So whether the size is big or not for the plant, it will have a derating impact?
Yes, I think it's a more serious thing, because when you look at something which is as significant or as big as import alert, it actually means that you might see an immediate impact, and that's something which is more serious, as you rightly pointed out. So I think this is what we are seeing currently in the stock reaction as well. And since the contribution of the plant, one point in time I remember that it used to be a very big plant for them. How the situation is now, I am not really very sure that much, but I think that import alert is a big thing, and if something of this sort happens with a plant that has been an old plant and in operation for quite long, then definitely it's a serious thing, and that's what we are seeing currently in the stock price reaction as well.
Right. And say if a company has got import alert, I'm not only talking about Ajanta or DVs, but if it has got import alert, however attractive the valuations are, one should just wait and watch, because these things take time to solve.
I completely agree, because I think the experience has been that not just with the pharma space or any particular company. So I'm not blaming this particular sector, I'm not blaming these particular companies. But what I mean that whenever something of this sort happen with a company or a sector, is actually makes sense to wait for a bit more time, because you might see a reaction. Is a falling knife. So tomorrow, if you see more results which are emerging, and maybe in a couple of hours, probably company will also comment what kind of situation is this. But you are not very sure, and I will also not go by what you see in terms of the company's official reaction and what the market would make out in a couple of hours. I think probably it's going to take a bit more time, and at this point, it's better to avoid and not try to time your purchase and time your buy in this kind of stock. So it doesn't make sense at this point for me, at least.
Right. In terms of pharma, now that Ajanta has got, DVs has got, there was just a sense in the last 6 months that approvals will increase, Lupin will solve the problem, Sun Pharma will solve its problem. So again, that concern why the sector has been underperforming will continue?
Yeah, I think these are, if you look at why this is happening in this space, is that some of the large caps first started get hit. So when we see something which was very, very unique and very, very rare, that was seen in the case of Ranbaxy, then you started to see many other companies. It is a thing which is happening in last 18-24 months. As I said, last 6 months were looking like that probably you are behind those issues, but it's not actually the case. And I believe that till the time you see that these events are not going to be there at least 3 to 6 months, then you can say that okay, fine, now we are at a level or at a situation where things will not really going to deteriorate further. But at this point, it's not really looking as maybe 6 months back, when people thought that, okay, fine, now we are mostly behind these issues and probably we'll get something better going forward. That's not, unfortunately, the case at this point in time.
Right. Just again, talking about numbers, as you said that it's difficult to predict such events. It's also difficult to predict the extent of damage that will happen with such events, until when it will happen.
Both actually. I think that one thing is that, of course, it's just difficult to forecast any individual event. There are so many companies, there are so many plants, and it's really very difficult to forecast. And for an individual to do that kind of research, or even for market cumulatively to do that kind of research, that you can actually forecast that these are the guys who will get hit next. At the same time, the damage is also dependent on what kind of contribution which is coming from a particular plant, what kind of impact you might see on other facilities as well, because it becomes very, very clear. It's like a specimen which you see. If you find a problem with a particular plant, you might see that there could be a challenge with many other facilities of a particular company. So that is one part. More importantly, it's a very sentiment driven event. So even if you don't see any large tangible event and difficult to figure out when this event will start impacting your financials, but even in that situation, you see that there is a important sentiment linked event which plays out in the sector and the companies, and that's something which is more serious. So number one, you have very, very difficult situation in these situations when you have to forecast who will be the guy that will be hit next. Second, what kind of damage you will see. And third, which is a total of everything, which is the sentiment impact on a particular stock. And that is something which is definitely more serious than anything else.
So, Mr. Sharma, what is your view on the markets? Considering the recent rally, you think valuations have again become neutral to slightly expensive?
Yeah, I think one thing which is there with the earnings season so far, that definitely is not as disappointing as it could have been. Honestly, I would say that I have been a bit pleasantly surprised on the earnings in general. I'm not saying they are a big beat or they are very good, but compared to expectations, definitely things are a little better. So we can probably align this with the performance of the market, but whether I expect that we are going to see a major breakout in the upward direction, I think is slightly unlikely. We are probably going to wait for at least next week till the time we see what's there in the budget proposals, and if there is anything significant we are going to see which is good or bad for the markets in general. So that is the time probably we'll see a next indication on how market would behave. But for next at least a week or so, I really don't think that there is anything that can happen to lead to a breakout from current levels to either in the upward direction or the downward direction.
Right. In terms of budget, is the expectation very, very high?
It always is, because whenever we see that budget is a big event, because it's actually bigger for media and the analyst and the market community than probably it is. And that's something which plays out. So you see a very continuous bombardment of budget, at least it starts a month before the budget actually comes. And that's something which leads to a lot of expectation and a lot of hopes, and that I don't think is a different case this time around. Only change is that we have seen a very big event in the form of demonetization in the month of November, and that has led to more expectation on what the government and finance minister would decide in terms of probably assuaging those concerns that things have been very, very bad. So apart from that, I really don't think that the expectations are very, very different or compared to previous budgets a lot higher. It's not the case in my view, but definitely people are expecting that there could be a positive budget and there could be things which might be interesting, at least in terms of corporate tax and the infrastructure spend, and also the push for rural and farm sector, which has been hit a little more by demonetization. So if those things play out in expected manner, I think things would perfectly fine. Things would be perhaps okay from the market's perspective as well.
Right. In terms of big corporate tax rates, do you expect it to happen?
I don't think the expectation is really going to play out like that, because government on one side is thinking of probably collecting a little more money, which would provide it more flexibility in spending. And what we are seeing today is that it's not a case where the corporate earnings are at a level where you can probably squeeze them a lot more. So in my sense, that is going to be a very, very difficult challenge, and it's going to be a fine balance between what the government expects in terms of benefits and in terms of some SOPs to corporates, but at the same time they have to look at how much money they want to collect so that they can have more flexibility in spending as well. So I'm not as hopeful as many of the other people are in terms of how much cut we are going to see in corporate tax rates in general.
Right. In terms of markets expectation, would you focus more on the stimulus, if there is any, or you would focus on where the fiscal balances go?
See, stimulus is a very temporary thing, so it might give you a very feel-good kind of factor for a week or so, but that's about it. It's very, very important. I think that was the case in last couple of budgets when the government and finance minister has actually been very, very careful about what kind of fiscal balance the government wants to maintain. And I think the thought process, whatever I understood from the previous budgets, and there is no change in the leadership of finance ministry, I think the basic thought process is unlikely to change, and that is a good thing, because fiscal balance is perhaps more important than no matter what kind of a stimulus you would provide. A stimulus is a double-edged sword. They might work, they might not work, but in long run and fundamentally they are not going to be helpful beyond a month or so. So I am definitely more concerned about what kind of numbers and what kind of expectations we would see on fiscal balance, and that's something which would be more important for me.
Right. In terms of expectations, you expect that stimulus may come towards the mid and the small segment, because that's where the hit has been very high?
Yes, actually, this is what I was referring to when you, I think you have put it very nicely, in the sense that what we have seen so far in last 3 months at least, the impact has been a lot more on the unorganized space, the small enterprises, MSMEs, and the space which is not at the forefront of what you talk about in terms of large corporates and more formal economy. And that is something which government will keep in mind, I hope, because when you talk about even the large guys, even the formal economy, they are very much dependent on what's happening in the informal space, and you have to provide some kind of support to them. So if the stimulus comes to those categories, those segments, I am perhaps happy, and I think that would be fine. But if you are trying to make it more broad-based, that's going to be nothing short of disaster, and that is something which government should not really do.
Mr. Sharma, thank you so much for taking out time for us. Always good to get in a perspective.